whiteboard, that's going to get erased. So if you want to take a photo on it, you can do that. Some people take notes, some people take pictures. Either way is fine. But just so you get a heads up that the whiteboard's going to get wiped pretty soon.
But this is also going to be on the review that you're recording, right?
Correct.
Okay. And then you'll tell us how to get access to that, or teach us how to go there.
I just send a link and you have the access automatically.
Okay.
So it'll usually be a set of video links, and that usually always is a set of video links.
Okay.
And you have our emails through Paul.
I need to collect that usually at lunchtime.
Okay.
Grab a sheet of paper and just collect that information.
Okay.
So that's the setup to go. And depending on how my schedule goes, I get the links out within 3 to 7 days. So sometimes the activity level is way too high to be able to do it.
Okay.
So when I send it, I don't just send a link. I say, here's what the topics are. So it's a little bit more than just sending a link. And that helps because I just build up this email thread that's all of the video links in one email. And it's already pre-indexed that way. All right, back to this. Okay, so we did a little bit of flash forward into this, but the one thing to emphasize in your mind, business analysis is all about going from current state to future state. So the word state is used in computer science a lot. It's used in business. Sometimes people are familiar with it, sometimes they're not. But current state is just how are the business processes operating now? Okay, what change do we need to make? Whatever that change is, that defines the future state. You write the requirements that describe that future state, and then it gets implemented according to a strategy. The strategy identifies, what are we doing? That's the requirements, of course. There's the project manager that's dealing with the who's doing it, and the when. The project manager is responsible for delivering at that particular point in time. Okay. And the whole context of working this what, who, and when is that we start with a business case and a business requirement. So I put business requirement way up front there, trying to separate it out from business analysis requirements. Okay, just to drive that home. This is to some degree a quick survey into what are the areas of requirements. So we include stakeholder requirements, which is a description of stakeholder needs. So it's like what, and maybe that could have been adjusted a little bit. It's almost like stakeholder expectations. But you need it by what date do you need it? What amount of ROI are you expecting if that's not confidential to their business?
Would we not do the requirement first, then for the case? Because that's how I would generally do it. What is your requirement? And then we will build a business case for it.
That'll be interesting. We'll have that discussion when we get to the whiteboard in a little bit. Okay. And so since there is some variation in the ways some businesses actually do their work, and you mentioned the variation right there, the point to emphasize in here is this is consistent with the way BA-BOK views it. So BA-BOK talks about a business case and a business requirement. It's up at top. Then there's stakeholder requirements. They're still fairly light. It's when you get to the solution requirements from the BA, that's when all the heavy lifting happens. So a lot of activity going on there. And I put in here a mention of a senior business analyst, because I've had some classes where people are like, wow, that's what a business analyst does? You gotta be kidding me, I'll never be able to do that. Okay, it's like, well, there's entry-level business analysis and then there's the senior positions. Just like in every career path, there's always entry-level, intermediate, and expert, senior. Okay, so this class is oriented towards all the business analysis entails, which includes what the senior business analyst does. So don't get thrown off track by, I gotta know all that stuff. Now, for the passing certification, yes, you gotta know all of it. For understanding how does a business operate, what's the environment in which I'm gonna be doing requirements, if I'm doing requirements, whether it's entry level, intermediate, or senior, we cover that context. Okay. So verification and validation, now this is interesting because an example where I mentioned earlier that Jenny was doing work with this benefits package service for compensation to different companies. She would actually be doing some validation activity herself 2 or 3 times a week, some QA type work. Okay, so it's not uncommon for a BA to actually do some of the testing. That's a person that's writing the requirements, and it's good to just kick the tires and say, okay, is this what am I getting what I actually asked for or not?
Now, what I've experienced as a developer, the BA is wondering if something's possible. So they would pull me to the side so my manager would know, and we would work on a proof of, we call it like a proof of concept.
Yep.
And so
Yep.
I would actually be doing the work, and I don't know if that was a proper procedure, but I'm doing the work. And when it proves the proof of concept, then she's doing like the solution, and it's backwards. And so, I didn't know if that was the proper way to be doing stuff.
So that's a good example of prototyping. So prototyping is a really handy way of getting one's mind around what are we exactly doing. So sometimes the prototypes are production code, and sometimes with throwaway code. Either way is okay. There's no rules written around it, but the concept of using prototyping to figure out the requirements is often the case. Okay, and then there's deployment at the end. Okay. Internally for business processes, externally if you're providing services or products to customers. So this idea of we've got 2 tracks, it's like 2 train tracks going in parallel. I can be on the business analysis track where I'm paying attention to business processes, or I can be on the train track that's paying attention to creating products and services. Generally, it's one or the other. It's very rare to have those actually combined together. And I say that with a purist statement. I tend to be a little bit more pragmatic. If you're providing a service, generally that service is built around the business processes. So those 2 are intrinsically linked. I just let that one go with that. Yeah. All right, so this is where we're going to put a little bit more information on the whiteboard to connect some dots together here. But this is a summary that you can write on. To actually fill this out would not fit on the slide very well. So I use the whiteboard, and in general I use the whiteboard to summarize like anywhere from 4 to 40 slides. This one's a little bit smaller, so it's a little more challenging to do. Sean Bergen's got a bigger whiteboard. All right, but if you look at the common VA roles, there's 3 common VA roles. So as we saw earlier, we've got our business cases focus, we've got a requirements focus, and we've got a QA V&V, verification and validation. That's this V&V right here, and the second bullet on the bottom of the slide. Okay. And then the VA is working with the solution architect. You're also going to see that person referred to as a systems analyst. So this gives a sense of like over a period of time and over what segments of the business are these people actually working. All right, so let's unpack this a little bit as we look at portfolio management, program management, product management, project and operations. There's some flow that happens here, some triggers from one stage to the next, and that'll help get into the perspective that you mentioned about doing the requirements. What was that order?
Getting what their need is first and then getting the business case, so the requirements and
Oh
the
yeah, the
business case.
requirements, yeah, the business case. Okay, so let's take this to the whiteboard. This is a item to always come back to, the way it's going to wind up on the whiteboard. that every now and then. Sure. Okay, so.
And this is, I'm referencing this when I was doing product management and with a lot of the developers.
Okay, so product management context.
Right.
Okay. Agile environment or not?
No.
Okay.
Some of it was a mixture. It was some waterfall, depends on the depth of the project, and then some of it was primarily agile. That would be maybe a 1 to 2 week type thing.
Okay. Okay, so let's take this diagram and expand it a bit. So one item that's not on that slide is that we start with, and I'm going to use a different definition of strategy here, we're going to see later. We start with strategy that involves differentiation. Okay, when we look at some of the business cases, and, how does the BA work with the business people, the business side of the house? We'll see this concept of differentiation come up, but it basically means like you got like a lot of auto manufacturers out there, right? So how can all of them be making money? But they are. They figure out ways to differentiate themselves so that they're not competing head on. It's not like Ford is forcing Chrysler to lose or BMW is forcing Toyota to lose their business. I mean, they're competing against each other, but everybody's still making money because they differentiate and figure out how to define their brand and their features. All right, so who owns the strategy or differentiation? So the strategy is owned by the C-suite. This is your chief executive officers, the chief information officer, chief legal counsel, all the ones that are named chief. Okay, so that's why they call it the C-suite. All begins with C. All right, so they basically are defining that this is what's going to make our business different from the competitor. This is the market we're going after. All right, Apple is great at doing strategy differentiation. They came up with a novel idea. You know what? I think the technology is advanced enough now we can make user interfaces incredibly simple. So they just totally, how do you call that? Not destabilized, disrupted. They totally disrupted the mobile phone market when they came out with their first iPhone. And interestingly enough, they did their test with an iPod. So they tested their ultra simple user interface on an iPod. And I was able to like, wow, okay, that worked. Let's take it to the next level. Let's, some would say, steal some engineers from Motorola and make a phone. There's a whole story behind that one. Okay, so when you're talking about the business side of the house, you've got portfolio management at the top. So portfolio management, as is on that slide, speaks about, General Electric is a common enough company, so we can take them as an example. What is General Electric's portfolio? You look at them as a company. Their portfolio is jet engines, appliances. What do appliances and jet engines have to do with anything? Well, they both have electrical components. I guess GE can say, yeah, we're doing electrical. But then they also do electricity because they provide power power-oriented products, both on production of power as well as like the light bulbs. So they're all over the place. Okay, so portfolio says it's okay to be all over the place. They take each one of their business units and say, okay, the medical business unit, you're responsible for your profit and loss. You're going to operate like an independent business within our portfolio. Okay, so when I'm talking about business analysis and referring to businesses, and I'll use that term business fairly often, just as is. I'm always referring to that collection of people for which some manager has profit and loss responsibility. So General Electric, it's a conglomerate. It has probably about 10 to 15 different points of profit and loss responsibility within their business, within their business units. All right, so portfolio can be very broad, unrelated products, or one could argue, oh, they're related. Okay, what does the light bulb have to do with jet engine? You know, okay, so it's in there. All right, so portfolio management and program management. If you're in a large company, you've got a variation here. And then you've got product management underneath it. A small company, you're not going to have, or a medium-sized company, you're usually not going to have program management. You'll always have product management. You'll always have portfolio management. If it's a really small company, portfolio management, product management, they're going to be the same thing. Those small, medium, large companies. Looking at these 3 Ps right here, is anybody doing the PMP certification? Okay. All right, so if you look at PMBOK, it's PMP, body of knowledge, just like the VA-BOK, business analysis, body of knowledge. I think the VA-BOK's copied the PMBOK body of knowledge. That's a good idea. All right, so from PMI, which offered the Project Management Institute, they offer certifications on a wide variety of areas, everything from risk management to project management. So they offer certification in product management, program management, portfolio management as well. So these are all the standard disciplines that are always present in every business. Okay. It just depends on the size of the business to whether you actually need the middle one or not. Okay. Now we've got this on the right-hand side, left-hand side, sorry. This represents the business community. But this is not the project community. You flip over here to the project community. We'll talk about some roles here and then operations. Where we're going with this is how do you transition between these? What is the business analyst actually doing? What are the key triggers throughout this process? All right, so who's involved with the project?
But you have the project manager, but you also have the program manager. So program manager.
Right, so you can have your program manager. And I'm putting it over here. I should really slide it over here. Program manager's going to be in several places.
Drawing here all over.
Right. Here you got your project manager. Okay. All right, what's the transition from this side to this side? And put this on blue. All right, when the key transition, and you'll get this from the PMP class, is called the project charter. Okay. So what can you imagine would be the key items in a project charter?
Scope.
Yep. There's a high level requirements, so its scope is a big part of it. Scope from a high level perspective.
Budget.
Yep. All these basic things. Scope, budget, schedule is the other one. You think of it as milestones from a schedule perspective. Another key part about the project charter.
It's not the product participants, it was just the teams.
Right, and specifically towards the naming of the people, it's the sponsor. This is the person who's putting the $200,000 on the table. Okay, so that person's name goes in there. It's like, okay, you approve this, just to make it clear who made the decision, right? Okay. And then the flip side of this is the project manager. This is the person that's spending the $200,000. Okay, so this project charter is whether it's agile or traditional software development is always a key part. Okay, once the project charter gets signed off, then we actually move into the project stage because there's a project manager that's assigned. So, but what comes before the project charter? And the answer was actually on the screen.
What a project charter. Or the business case.
Right.
Okay.
It's a business case. So we've got like a business case 1, business case 2, business case 3. All these business cases get written. So as people in portfolio management or program management, depending on, or potentially the product management, just depending on the scope of the business case, is the business case encompassing $100,000 or $10 million? And that'll decide which level of the organization has the authority to review that level of expenditure. Or they might come through and say, business case 1, check, that one's good. This one, the return on revenue is not going to be good enough, so let's kill that one. And let's kill another one here, but there's a few others in here that will approve. All right, so a project charter always refers to a business case, and it could refer to like one of them or 2 of them. You could take a couple of business cases and blend them together in order to support, okay, here's how we want to group our financial expenditures. Okay. So the business case can come out of either of these 3 levels. Okay. All right, so within the project space, obviously, is where we have the requirements happening. Now, we obviously have requirements discussion at this business case context, like what are we doing? Right, but the big answer from the business case perspective is focused on, take an individual business case here. The business case is focused on providing a recommendation. Let's see. It's 2 C's. And a business case also focuses on identifying the alternatives. A real common perspective is, I'm going to build the software in-house, or we're going to contract it out. We're going to buy it from a third party, or do it ourselves. A build or buy decision. So recommendation, alternatives. This is what the business analyst is providing in the business case. So this is how, what you saw on this slide over here, when the BA is working with business cases, this is the context of the business case. It's a review of recommendations with some alternatives that those with the spending authority can review and say, we'll go with that one, we'll go with this one, not this one, and not this one. So they're doing some prioritization. Might be a really good idea, but the priority is, it just doesn't cut it for a couple business cases. And they'll formalize that into a project charter, which kicks off the project. All right, so in project land, what are we doing? This is where we're doing the solution requirements. And this is the solution requirements at the level of detail that it can actually be implemented or developed. So there's implementation as well, okay, which implies that you're doing your QA work here. Okay, what's the transition from project to operations? Different companies have different names, but there tends to be a more common name. But what's the transit? What's that transition? What label would you put on that arrow?
In the project aspect,
Say again?
initiations.
Going from project into operations?
We
Maintenance.
call it production. Well, from an IT standpoint, we were calling it production deployment.
Right, so
Okay.
deployment is the key word right here.
Okay.
Deployment. It's a fairly common word, but it's not necessarily always used. In Motorola, we didn't use that word. We just talked about it generically, like we're going GA, general availability of the release versus an alpha pre-release. So we still had a deployment team. The organization was called the deployment team. But our terminology internally was more oriented around the concept of general availability versus the preceding perspective. All right, now within deployment here, what happens in deployment?
Installations.
So install, upgrades. We got data migration. That's what Lamont had mentioned earlier. There's data migration that might happen.
There is also something, this is more IT related. There's a nightmare scenario where that you have, let's say, a project or the code that you're installing to production go in, and at the same time, the DBAs have applied some kind of patch that you didn't know was going to kill your program.
The patch releases.
Yeah, patch release that.
Microsoft all day long.
Those things make a big difference. All right, so that when you look at what happens in deployment, all of these two things are necessary, and it was implied here, but there's also usually some training involved. Okay. All of these things here are referred to as transition requirements. Okay, so I have the solution requirements, I've got transition requirements. Okay, which is separate from business requirements. You can think of business requirements as being up in this space. I haven't put it on the board. It fits before solution requirements. There's nothing wrong to say, for one of these business cases, let's go prototype something out. If we're going to spend a significant amount of money on it, you can be certain that there's going to be a project charter just for that prototyping. Like, we're willing to spend $80,000 on the prototyping in order to figure out whether this, $2 million deal is going to be feasible for us to do by ourselves, or whether we have to engage some other companies that have expertise we don't. That type of thing. All right, within operations, what are we always doing? We're always doing measurement. So it was supposed to make things better. Did it make things better? Whatever the it is, whatever the change is. Remember that diagram where we had that simple diagram of going from current state to future state? You got to be able to measure that future state. So before, usually the project charter is going to contain the success criteria. If I can add that on here as well. I say usually it would be like malpractice to not have it there. Okay. So that success criteria is something measurable. It's going to connect with this production or operations type environment. All right. Now, when you take a look at this in terms of the VA role that's on your slide, so this is filling in a lot of detail that doesn't all fit on one slide. Okay, but if you take a look at these pseudo timelines that are on the slide, VA business cases, that's pretty strictly within the business segment, working with the business people, but that VA is working with the solution architect. There's a little bit of that overlap between the dotted arrow and the solid arrow. Okay, solution architect is always working with the VA that's doing the requirements, and is usually the solution architect may or may not work with the QA space directly. Usually the BA is the person doing that. There's very little overlap. So this is a general rule of thumb, not uniformly practiced all over. So BA requirements, though, extends into operations. So who's the one holding the bag at the end of the day? It's like after everything's said and done, it's like the requirements are really good. The measurements are happening that we expected. Or what happened to the project? The measurements aren't coming in line. Did you miss the requirements? This is where we go back to that first slide we looked at earlier, saying that requirement or projects tend to fail based around requirements that are usually incomplete is the subtitle that I added to that. So the BA should not stop at the point of deployment. The BA needs to stop partway through production. So, okay, are the actual results achieved or not? Okay, so that's what's intended by seeing slide 12, show that the BA takes a peek at, watches what's happening for the first month or maybe 6 months of operation. So we've gotten hit by some interesting changes. You mentioned patches coming in. Okay, one of the product I worked on for 3 years, this, not the last 3 years, but more if I go in reverse time, it'd be the 4th, 5th, and 6th year, going back. Oracle put a change into their, what they consider a patch release. We didn't realize it. They weren't watching for changing default values. So in their prior releases, they had always had this number of failed login attempts set to infinite, basically null. They don't wrap any logic around that. But we took in a patch from them because we needed some other software fixes from them. In that patch, unbeknownst to us, they said, oh, by the way, 10 is the default value now. Oh. So about 4 months after release, periodically in the semi-random fashion, it's like all of a sudden people using our particular computer management system to run their network, they're calling up and say, it stopped working. Get a call from another city in another 3 weeks. It stopped working. Get another call. Stopped working. We're like, what on earth is going on here? Right. Random time frames. You've been running fine for like 4 months or 6 months, or I think one of them was actually 8 months. Every now and then there's these race conditions that cause the software that has automated authentication to the database where it'll just slip. And it's like there'll be this uptick on a failed login. But it takes like 4 months to 8 months to get 10 failed logins. So first time it happens, like, what on earth is going on here? Second time is like, maybe I think we can figure this out. The third time we nailed it right away. Because then we had gotten into a frame of thinking about what could possibly be going wrong. All right, so here's an important aspect too, is if you look at outages, that was technically would be considered an outage. It wasn't on call processing, but it was on the operations management ability. So people can configure the systems and expand the capacity of computers at the bottom of cell towers. The point is that configuration settings are very, very subtle. And that's usually one of the main things that gets overlooked. So if you looked at measurements and solution requirements around configuration, the very subtle item here is configuration. Usually, in telecommunications, 90% of the outages are due to configuration problems. Okay. That would be true for IT anywhere, because you're just dealing with computer networks, configuring software that's going to run it. So paying attention to configuration is the theme of that story. Okay, so we've got our BA for requirements going all the way into operations. That little story I was telling you about, watching for defects and things like that. So BA who's requirements focused, and then there's the BA who's business case focused. And then on this boundary here is where you're going to find plenty of job descriptions that are going to be titled BA/QA. Okay, so this is an example when we come back next week. It's like, what did we put on the board? And try not to, and when we do the review, it's like, don't just read off your notes. The whole point is to try to, and this is really a key thing for job interviews. The key thing is to be able to put this in your own words and be able to see, okay, here's how I would express it from my own background, from my own perspective when I'm in a job interview. Okay. So the important thing here is to hear yourself saying the words and processing it that way. That's the only thing that's going to make a difference in the job interview. It doesn't matter how much we know, it matters how articulately we can communicate what we know. This time I'm going to share the screen. Okay, so this is like ultra core right here, pages 11 and 12. This is like the heartthrob together with that 3 systems diagram that I put on the whiteboard. Those are the 3 main pictures to keep in mind. So as we go forward into this, so how does a business analyst actually develop? Usually they're focused on IT improvements, meaning it's requirements that are oriented towards very specific software functionality. So you think of IT as really being software improvement, software changes. And as that entry-level business analyst gets more exposed to the domain, whether it be in the finance industry or some manufacturing processes, if it's a company oriented that way, whatever the domain might be, then the person's getting exposed more and more to the business processes. So business process is what the definition we looked at maybe an hour ago. What's a business process? And you can flip back in your notes if you need to. It's back about roughly 6 or so pages or so.
Different activities.
Right. Activities, plural is the key thing.
Right, have an input and output.
Yeah, each activity will have inputs and outputs. And from the
Transformation.
yeah, and will be process is all about transformation. So the key thing in there is it's end-to-end activities. What's the first activity, the second activity, the third activity? So end-to-end just means from start to finish, whatever that sequence of activities is. So process improvement, I always prefer the word workflow. But what's the workflow? Then I can say it in one word. Everybody generally knows and understands what workflow means. Okay, and the word workflow is actually very common in business. It doesn't matter what the domain of business is. What could be an auto dealership, could be manufacturing, could be banking firm. The idea of workflow is just a commonly understood word phrase that's unambiguous. So business improvement, what would this actually entail then? You're going to improve the business. What we just talked about on the whiteboard, you're going to be starting with your business cases. So you can think through from requirements, IT improvement, so think software, either back end or front end. Process improvement still going to be requirements, but now we're seeing the end-to-end activities, and business improvement, meaning let's look at the business cases. Okay. Now, business improvement means our revenue for the most part. All right, so taking those same blocks and this time looking at it from business improvement, going to process improvement, IT improvement, because this is the flow that I laid out on the whiteboard. Well, I instead of saying business improvement, I said, hey, this is portfolio program product management. Because those are the bodies of people, so to speak, the groups of people that provide the business improvement. Okay, so they're doing strategy analysis and systems thinking. In terms of the business processes, there's value chain analysis. So we'd seen value chain already. Value chain analysis would mean this guy right here. Here's a value chain model. They're doing value chain analysis going from inbound logistics all the way through sales, after sales. Saying, are we connecting all the dots here? Why do we keep getting customer complaints about this specific topic? Does that mean that, you know, the handoff from operations in terms of like system integration, I'll just take that one to order processing. You know, why do we keep shipping out this wrong type of product to the customer? And then for an IT improvement, think IT here is in software. IT is, you know, a little bit broad, but you know, if you work towards the software capacity that you need, then you buy the hardware capacity to support what the software requires. The software drives what happens there, as well as with security. That's another dimension. Okay, modeling, there's a term here. Want us to be able to infuse that term into is it actually exists. Okay, model is nothing more than a diagram. Entity relationship diagram, a swim lane diagram. A model is just a diagram. Okay, so we'll be looking at a few diagrams. Now, from a VA-BOC perspective here, we've got a snapshot right out of their book that shows the value spectrum. So you can imagine, of course, with strategy analysis, we're talking about potential strategy. This doesn't exist yet, it's just vaporware, it's a business case, it's just potential. And when you take it all the way through into production, then you get actual value created. All right, so this is the idea of the value spectrum. Goes from strategy analysis through requirements analysis and design definition, or RAD for short, as it mentions underneath, into a solution evaluation. So guess what the first two activities are at the front? You don't have to guess because it's right in front of us.
Need a solution. Which one? Strategy.
Very, very first to it. Top two is the first item. Current state, future state. Do you know where you are? Do you know where you're going? Okay. And then there's risk assessment and defining the change strategy to be able to go from the current state to the future state. It's a really simple diagram that I've shown that typifies what strategy analysis is. Okay. When we go into the requirements phase, this is within the project from a formal sense. Some of these requirements are going to exist in the context of creating business cases and figuring out alternatives and whatnot. So you're going to get some activity happening there, especially if you need to do feasibility studies as part of the business case. It's usually done at that point. It's done around some set of requirements, which I don't know if your context, Lorraine, was in the context of feasibility studies, but you mentioned doing requirements either in conjunction with or before business case.
Right.
So usually that's going to be done for a feasibility study sense. I don't know if yours is feasibility study or a different context.
It was pretty much that, yes.
Okay. So feasibility means, like, can we actually have this combination of software and hardware working for us?
Right.
Or does it lack some features that we need? In which case, we got to walk away from it. So a feasibility study usually takes product, hardware, and or software from multiple vendors and says, how does this combination work from this vendor? How does this combination work from this other vendor? Which one are we going to choose? And a feasibility study particularly is answering not just technically are the requirements met, but are each of these potential vendors that we're going to buy software, hardware from, are they going to be in business long enough to support this? So there's some business requirements that go with the feasibility study. Okay, so there is that common element that it happens in this strategy analysis of defining the change strategy, change strategy. Let's do a feasibility study, because we actually have no clue. All right, so the RAD tasks, and these tasks are straight out of BAPOC. Go down through here. Let's see. This is define requirements architecture on number 4, define solution options. Okay, so it's like, wait a minute, define solution option. I thought the solution architect was supposed to do that. Okay, so the BA was working closely with the solution architect here. Then solution evaluation tasks. So this is what we mentioned earlier under operations. Measure the solution performance, analyze the solution performance, assess the limitations, and these first 3 can all be done during V&V as well, during verification in terms of QA. So you get to get enough confidence that this thing will hang together with 20,000 users beating on it on a particular busy hour. Maybe it's like at 2 p.m. of the day. It's always, what is the load? Is it going to hold up or not? So that's a measurable perspective. Do I still get response time of 2 seconds when there's 10,000 users on there or not? Or does it drop to 2 minutes? One thing that's a little different from what I put on the whiteboard is that when you go into requirements design, they show proof of concept prototype here. That proof of concept prototype, yes, it does involve design. Yes, it does involve requirements. But this is a blend that I've never been comfortable with BAPOC. It's like, okay, you guys say it's done that way. Your guys are writing the certification exams, so we'll just go with that. Okay, but I've seen a lot of cases in the feasibility study, and even what was mentioned earlier with regard to just sitting down with the BA and doing a proof of concept. And you can do this before requirements often, or do this, I should say, as part of requirements. It doesn't necessarily come after design. But this is where I think when the BAPOC transitioned their version 2, which was traditional project management, into agile project management, this is traditional. It's not really agile. So I think they left out a little part there that should have changed. That's my own opinion, but okay, so this is a sense of 3 of the 6 knowledge areas. So if you're going to do the certification, here's 3 out of the 6 with their corresponding tasks. So this isn't rocket science. This is like, okay, that's actually not too bad. You read the book on that or the PDF and be able to connect the dots here pretty well.
These are the last 3 of the 6.
Yeah, think of it as the inner 3. We'll see another diagram that shows supportive knowledge areas.
Strategy, which is on here.
Yeah.
Because I did a little acronym to remember them all.
Oh, okay. But we'll save that for about 2 or 3 classes from now.
Okay.
So that the way we've got the material for this class set up here is it's very requirements focused in the beginning. Because that's dominantly what most of the job postings are out there for, is doing requirements. So that helps get people locked into what's relevant for the next job. So that the other 3 knowledge areas, you don't have a lot of influence over that. It's going to be what it's going to be when you go to the job. But this, you actually do have quite a bit of, this is where you're intrinsically going to be involved. So just to mention what the other 3 are though, there's a requirements management life cycle. So it's like, okay, this is high level fluffy stuff, but it may say, well, in JIRA we do this. Okay, and then there's
Elicitation.
the elicitation is within the RAD space. So that's still in there. It just doesn't show up. It shows up more as a planning for elicitation. How are we going to generally handle the framework of elicitation?
Yeah, because in the BAPOC, it has elicitation and collaboration
Yes.
combined.
Mm-hmm.
and then you have the first one, which is the planning and the monitoring.
Yeah, planning and monitoring, that's what I was trying to get my mind back around. Yep. So again, that's more like a planning and monitoring. It's not actually authoring and pushing those requirements into utilization and review. All right, so the essence of the BA position, we've got these three areas: business case focus, requirements focus, and QA focus. So think of the differences here. Business case focus, working with stakeholders, transforming strategy goals into business opportunities, usually expressed in terms of ROI. Requirements, here's where the elicitation comes up, analyzing, communicating, and validating requirements, and these changes are focused on business processes or on products and services offered by the business. So what did we say about the relationship between business processes and services? Services are intrinsically tied to the business processes. Well, if you're doing like loan management, the bank is doing that. There's a specific business process that provides this service called a loan. Okay. All right, so the services and processes, business processes, those are intrinsically linked to each other. Whereas you can actually develop new products that are not intrinsically linked to your business processes. Unless it's manufacturing, but we're not talking about manufacturing processes here, so that wouldn't really count in my view. All right, so here's some tools used by business analysts. So BPM, since you've had a little bit of exposure with various tools, BPM, new term, or is that something you've seen before?
No, for me.
Okay, so that's business process management. So BPM is always business process management. Swim lane diagrams would be one way of expressing a process. There's workflow orchestration type tools. Okay. So statistically, we talked about measuring, and it's, when you're measuring, you always, if you're going to measure something in the future, that means you've measured your current state. You got to know your baseline. You know, you don't know if you made your future measurements or if you made your future success of measurements unless you know what your current measurements are. So you've got to have that delta. You're really measuring, and obviously, once you accomplish your future state, that becomes your current state for your next project. So it just keeps rolling along. Like waves coming up on a beach. All right, modeling 2, we're not going to walk through all of this stuff. The main point in here is that there's a lot of focus point of usage. There's a wide breadth of tools out there to use from a business analysis perspective. But there's one that's a little bit unusual though. So support tickets. Why on earth would you want to be looking at support tickets from a business analyst perspective?
Get information on like things that may have went wrong.
Perfect, exactly. This tells you that this is the root cause analysis. Look through those and use root cause analysis to answer what went wrong. So we don't want to make those mistakes again. Did it miss some requirements? What's going on here? Okay, 6 competencies. The 6 is what's out in BABOK. They have a chapter 9. I can provide a summary of that chapter that I've written out. But as you look through these characteristics of BA, analytical thinking, problem solving, behavioral characteristics, you can put on the side of that, people skills, soft skills. I mean, technically, there's soft skills is the term that's used for working with people. Business knowledge. So another way of saying that is what's the domain knowledge? Because every business has its domain. Are we in the finance domain? Are we in the maybe banking and investment, or banking domain, or the investment domain, or your manufacturing domain, retail domain. What is that business engaged in? Right, communication skills, we'll be touching on that when we look at another slide here in a little bit. Interaction skills, there's behavior, me as a person, then there's interaction with others, and then tools and technology. So this is hopefully like, now that all makes sense, okay? Because and there's a really interesting study that was done comparing, and I don't know if you've helped put this on the whiteboard. If you look at emotional intelligence, this EI, it's also referred to as EQ. And I think the only reason why they refer to it as EQ is because then they can draw a comparison to IQ. What's your IQ? Okay. And there's a study at Brad, which I probably should find the source and put it in a slide somewhere. But they did a comparison. Successful people, does IQ and EQ both matter equally, or is one more important than the other? So this emotional intelligence, EQ, we'll touch on this after break when we get to our slides on people skills. But this is a great read. I've got some information available on this. It basically talks about, let me do a quick sketch and then we'll cover it a little bit more after lunch. Emotional intelligence talks about, from a self perspective, that's this column, and this is the others column. And then here it's self-aware. This is others aware. Here this is self-managing. And then this is relationship management. All right, so some of you had mentioned when we were getting introducing ourselves to each other, you've got a real bend towards looking at people. This is a great model to be able to look at people through and to find where you are on the model as well. The general idea is that you go from self-aware to self-management, go from self-aware also to others management, and then that enables you to reach the space of relationship management. So there's certain key traits there. This model's been around for a long time, meaning like 30 years, something like that. When you look at this whole point of interaction skills, communication skills, and behavioral characteristics, that's half of what's listed on the slide, right? And this emotional intelligence model covers all three of those. So in one really simple model, it's like, oh, I've got half of the BA characteristics covered through one simple expression that I can think through. Okay, so that's a foreshadow into emotional intelligence. The point of the study, though, was that the successful people were the ones that generally are, let me get this in the right wording. You think of the people that would be successful, like the really smart ones, the IQ stuff. I didn't care for studying. I'm not that type of person. I'm more in the creative bend, which is why I went to computer science and software. There's a lot less rules than mechanical engineering. Didn't like all the rules. Something about the thickness of metals and the hardness of metals, and it's like, this is getting a little bit boring for me. I'm sorry.
I started off at IIT in electrical engineering. So in the second year, I was taking a midterm for circuit analysis, and I said, enough is enough. Switch my major.
Yep, I had the similar experience. So they found out that people with high emotional intelligence, high EQ, those people were 4 times more likely to be successful. You take all things equal, high IQ, high EQ, so you had 4 times more people with a high emotional quotient, or emotional intelligence being successful. That's because they're relating to people. You can be smart and be a real jerk about relating to people. We've seen people like that wherever we worked with. It's impossible to not stumble over them. And I've worked with a few of them here and there. But the person that has emotional intelligence says, you know what? I know how to work with that person still. I'm going to still find a way to honor that person, so that person has a sense of worth that you can add to, that I can add to. The person with emotional intelligence is really going to know how to manage that relationship in a different manner, because they know how to take things that others would view as insult and set that aside and say, I'm not going to let that bend my emotions here. That's just this person's problem. Maybe that person's in a really bad spot in life, or has had a history that has made them behaviorally be a difficult person to get along with. There's stuff in the past that has to.
I can really relate to that.
Yep.
I was put in roles to deal with the most difficult people.
Yep. That sounds like it was a challenge.
Actually, we ended up turning out being buddies. Because other people couldn't understand.
Mhm.
So you just have to think out of the box when you're dealing with people like that.
Very much so. Yeah, there's that one of the, when you get into a new job, new team, especially as a business analyst, and I did this as a systems engineer, which was the BA/solution architect role. Because I'm getting on a new project every 3 years, it's a new group of people almost entirely. And there's very few people from a previous team. It's like maybe 2 out of 40. So, but I always tried to find the most difficult person first. And the way I would describe that is, who's the person that's going to be the most resistant, and build that relationship with that person first by spending some time listening to what their perspectives are, what her perspectives are, his perspectives are. So then it's really a form of brainstorming, but it's just one-on-one. So it can be managed. Though there is one person that even my boss at this one job in the mid-90s still is not able to figure out this one guy. He was good, but he was very difficult to deal with.
Challenged.
Yes, I won't get into details. Anyway, why don't we take a break for lunch right now? This is competencies, and we'll get into this. Who does business analysis? And segue into the 2 big questions then of what does a BA do? Actually, let's check this slide, then we'll cover it over. All right, so this slide basically is saying the skills of a business analyst show up all over the place in lots of different jobs. There's the formal, I have the business analyst title, but the product manager is doing business analysis stuff. The project manager actually is doing some level of business analysis. The executives are doing some level of business analysis. But there's a lot of, as we go through these like 40 or so techniques, you'll see that there's lots of people doing different techniques of business analysis. Okay, so bottom line, business analysis helps business do business better. This is the tagline from IIBA, the International Institute of Business Analysis, but it's a nice, good focus point. So we'll start with this when we get back.